Signori, grazzi tal-li naqattu magħna. Illum il-KSU qed ivara policy paper rigward ir-riforma kostituzzjonali. Din hija inizjattiva illi bdejna fil-bidu tal-2020, qed inizjattiva varata mill-Uffiċċju Politika Soċjali tagħna u fil-fatt wara konsultazzjoni ma' ħafna organizzazzjonijiet studenteski permezz tal-Kummissjoni Politika Soċjali tagħna wasalna għal setta proposti li huma viżjoni tal-istudent universitarju għal ġenerazzjoni ġdida ta' Maltin, għal Malta ġdida b'istituzzjonijiet b'saħħithom, b'istituzzjonijiet ġusti li jirriflettu il-perspettiva moderna tal-ġenerazzjoni tagħna lejn pajjiżna. Bħal ta' żmien sena kellna sfidi f'pajjiżna li wrew illi iva kien hemm istanzi fejn l-istituzzjonijiet ta' pajjiżna fallew. Dan aħna rikonoxxejnieh, dan il-proċess aħna ipparteċipajna fih, però dan il-proċess isejjaħ lilna kull ċittadin Malti, inkluż studenti, biex nitabbew bir-responsabbiltà illi iva nikkontribwixxu għal bidla li rridu naraw. U għalhekk f'dan il-proċess il-proposti fihom infushom huwa importanti, però b'din il-laqgħa tal-lum x'ixtieq jagħmel il-Kunsill. Illum irridu apparti milli nvaraw dawn il-proposti, aħna rridu naħorġu l-messaġġ hemm barra illi iva wasal iż-żmien anke għal fatt illi rridu nagħmlu proċess ta' rikonċiljazzjoni bħala pajjiż biex nibdew niddiskutu l-mistoqsijiet il-kbar ta' pajjiżna, biex nibdew nagħmlu il-quo vadis tagħna, biex nibdew ngħidu aħna min aħna, l-identità tagħna x'inhi. U jekk m'aħniex ħanagħmlu dan, wisq nibża illi l-attività kollha li saret is-sena l-oħra li forsi fiżikament tmewtet ftit bil-pandemija tal-COVID-19 ħajkun kollu għal xejn. Għaliex fil-verità ir-rabja li kellu l-poplu, inkluż studenti bħal da żmien sena, ma kienx lejn individwi jew għalkemm forsi kien hemm dik ir-rabja wkoll, però kienet li s-sistema fiha nfisha. U pajjiżna mill-indipendenza law qatt ma kellu l-ewwel nett perjodu ta' rikonċiljazzjoni bħala poplu, ejjew narfu li iva teżisti l-firda, qatt ma kellna wkoll eżerċizzju serju biex naraw minn aħna. U naħseb illi iva wasal iż-żmien għaliha, wasal iż-żmien illi l-Konvenzjoni Kostituzzjonali msemmija mill-President ta' Repubblika tiġi msejħa u din il-konvenzjoni tkun forum wiesa li tara illi kulħadd int min int ġej minn fejn ġej tista' tikkontribwixxi. Ir-riforma kostituzzjonali ma tistax tkun eżerċizzju akademiku, tkun eżerċizzju ta' iva, ta' poplu, int minn int, ġej minn fejn ġejn, il-background tiegħek u x'inhu, għandek xi ħaġa x'tikkontribwixxi għax wara kollox dan id-dokument, dawn il-ftit paġni li nsejħu l-Kostituzzjoni huma l-identità tagħna. U għalhekk biex ma ntawwalx iżjed, nħalli f'idejn kollegi tiegħi mill-Uffiċċju Politika Soċjali biex issa jibdew jippreżentaw il-proposti tagħhom.
Thank you, Matthew. We shall now be switching to English for any non-Maltese speaking viewers. First of all, thank you all for being with us today. At the start of our term back in July, one of the first points on our list was the finalizing of this reform paper. So what we did was we set out to work by revamping the already existing task force and by distributing the work evenly amongst the volunteer members. Through a number of KPS meetings held on this theme, KSU provided UM students with a forum for debate on such an imminent reform, with the goal being to represent and present the students' perspective on a national level. So with this, we would like to thank each and every member of that task force for their tireless work throughout. Namely, we would like to thank Alex, Chantel, Jacob, Emma, Katrina, Daniel, Andrew, Nico, Jasmine, Andrew, and Krista. Thank you once again. I will now give the floor to my colleague, KSU Social Policy Coordinator Neil Zara.
So, I will be giving a background on the proposals that we have come up with. Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Matthew. So, these proposals outline what KSU will be advocating for should the Constitutional Convention be convened. Let's start with non-alignment. So, this clause added in the mid-80s is in reality no longer relevant. How can Malta be non-aligned when it is a member state of the European Union? And what does non-aligned even mean in today's world where the geopolitical landscape is simply not as clear-cut as it was back then? In order to reflect the realities of 21st century Malta, the supposed principle of non-alignment is not even an option, let alone a constitutional provision. Moving on to the religion of Malta, a controversial area given the Church's prominent role in Maltese society over the centuries and its sometimes polarizing stances. While it is undeniable that the Church has contributed greatly to the social and moral formation of communities across Malta and Gozo, the constitutional article pertaining to it states that, and I quote, "The religion of Malta is the Roman Catholic Apostolic religion. The authorities of the Church have the duty and the right to teach what principles are right and wrong, and that religious teaching shall be provided in all state schools as part of compulsory education." I think we can all agree that the Malta we live in today is a secular state, with a crystal clear separation between the powers of the state and the scope of the Church. Furthermore, one must ask, how can the legal existence of a state have a religion? The removal of a state religion would not erase the abundantly present roots and connections to the Catholic Church in most ways of life, and vice versa. The Catholic Church and its teachings cannot and clearly do not rely on these constitutional articles to still be relevant and important in the daily life of the island. In order to truly be an inclusive society, irrespective of any possible criteria of discrimination, we have to realize that the compulsory teaching of religion in primary and secondary schools is not the way forward and might very well be counterproductive to the cause it aims to accomplish. Similarly, we have to acknowledge that the option of having ethics rather than religious studies in a limited number of state schools is a step in the right direction. However, it still ostracizes the growing minority who either practice a different religion or are atheist. We therefore took stock of both sides of the argument and proposed the addition of a wording similar to that of the 1978 Spanish Constitution, which acknowledges the predominance of Catholicism, yet does not ascribe any religion to the state. Turning to constitutional supremacy, the document we have analyzed and discussed is the most fundamental and basic of laws, intrinsically above any other law that Parliament can enact from time to time. Nevertheless, our Constitutional Court, as the highest court of the land, has shied away from striking down a law which is unconstitutional. To quote the former European Court of Human Rights Judge Giovanni Bonello, Malta's is the only constitutional court in the whole democratic world that has surrendered the function and left the last word to politicians. A rewording of this article, which leaves no room for the court to be timid, can undoubtedly contribute to a decrease in human rights violations, which simultaneously decreases the court's ridiculous caseload. We have also proposed for the Constitution's supremacy to be elevated to avoid any possibility of having a considerable majority in Parliament override it. With regards to citizenship, we recommend the addition of a proper definition as to what Maltese citizenship is and how it can be acquired, removing the reliance on ordinary legislation as it stands today. In a similar vein, we advocate for a constitutional ban on the sale of citizenship, given its controversies and multiple allegations of criminal misconduct. More interestingly, we argue in favor of adding EU citizenship as an automatic byproduct of having Maltese citizenship, which definition would be entrenched, minimizing the possibility of having a Brexit scenario playing out on our shores. Adding EU citizenship would reflect the significance of such a citizenship as an exclusive membership on our society, economy, and culture. Moving on to the President of the Republic, our intended audience and who we are appealing to convene the Constitutional Convention without any further delay. We have proposed a number of reforms to the role of the President, all with the underlying principle of having a more meaningful President who would be able to keep the executive in check. We support the President having the power to send a bill back to Parliament for reconsideration, as an extraordinary measure for Parliament to take heed of. Similarly, we propose the increase of the President's term from the current 5 to 7 years to avoid the possibility of having the presidency coincide with a single legislative term, allowing for stability and continuity. Moreover, we argue in favor of allowing former judges being allowed appointments as head of state, while prohibiting former prime ministers from being elevated to the highest office. We suggested the shifting of the power to nominate a vast number of public officials and board members, together with the prerogative of mercy from the Prime Minister to the President. With respect to Parliament, Malta has one of the most bloated parliaments in all of Europe, and as of this week, has the largest cabinet in relation to the numbers of MPs eligible ever. Due to our small size, Parliament can be whittled down to size, balancing out the expense and justifying a high-paid full-time job, allowing those elected to serve their constituents to their fullest ability, without losing focus on another job, or worse still, compromising their duties for the sake of kickbacks and corruption. In addition, we have also proposed the creation of a national threshold for one of the smaller parties to be elected to Parliament. Such a threshold would ensure proper representation and would encourage a shift away from the bi-party and highly polarized system, while preserving the good workings of the current proportional systems, which would be rendered null should a third party be elected to Parliament on its own steam. Moving on to the executive, our paper supports the notion of allowing the Prime Minister to appoint a capped number of technocratic ministers. This would allow the Prime Minister to select individuals with expertise and experience in their field, without having to resort to select individuals within a smaller Parliament. Needless to say, such ministers would still have to be responsible to and confirmed by Parliament. The continuing saga of the investigations into money laundering, corruption, car bombings, and trading in influence necessitate a stronger and more autonomous Attorney General and Police Commissioner. If elected through a qualified majority, that is 2/3 of Parliament, such posts will hold a higher esteem and independence in relation to other constitutional figures, allowing for a better working of the institutions they lead. Moving on to party financing, allegations of an uncomfortably close relationship between politicians and big business have become engraved in the daily news cycle. From the infamous Arloġ Lira to paid flights and hotel stays, the status quo is simply untenable. That is why we support the implementation of a system similar to the one in France, whereby political parties are allocated a sum of money in proportion to the votes received in the most recent general election, the number of seats won, and other criteria such as gender disparity within the candidates put forward, for example. The candidate's own expenditure would have to be capped and accounts filed within a stipulated time frame, a far cry from the situation today, where neither of the major political party media has filed their financial reports in the last decade. Of particular note is our proposal to create a Council of State made up of the most senior of constitutional figures from all organs of the state in order to advise the President in the exercise of his daily functions. Such a council can also give an opinion on a bill's constitutionality to Parliament prior to its enactment into law. To conclude, we strongly believe in the proposals I have just outlined, both in principle and in their attainability. Moreover, such proposals are not new to the scene, and most have been included in the compilation of proposals received by the President's Constitutional Reform Committee just last month. The proposals are plenty and the spectrum is wide. What we truly need is a convention made up of all sectors of civil society and including the political parties to debate such proposals and reach consensus, and for Parliament to listen rather than rush through its own reforms without consulting its constituents. Those were my remarks. I now hand over the floor to Julia.
Thank you, Neil. So, on a concluding note, we would like to thank you all for being with us today and also for all the support given. And we would also like to thank all those joining us from Facebook Live. and we would like to close off today's press conference. Thank you.